so many of us settle for less than fabulous in our careers, in our lives, in our relationships? How is it that we get stuck or settle for jobs that are and sometimes even get stuck in soul-sucking careers, or remain in relationships that don't serve us, maybe even repeat continually behaviors and habits, lifestyle habits that are dangerous for us? How is it that we get stuck? A few years ago, I decided to go on a bit of a quest to find the answers to these questions, when it occurred to me, I don't care. I think getting stuck is the easy part. I think all of us have been there at some point or another. What I was more interested in was, how can I get beyond, through, over, under any of the barriers that are preventing me from living my best life? That's the journey that I wanted to go on. And so I did. It's when on that journey, I found two simple words. Do you want to know what they were? What if I told you you'd first have to go on a little bit of an adventure? An adventure that would take you to fascinating places, have you interacting with interesting characters, and would even challenge you to do things that you never imagined you would ever be able to do. Would you go on that adventure? What if I warned you that the journey wasn't smooth, that there would be a lot of ups and downs, twists and turns, and that there'd be a lot of days when you would wonder if it wouldn't have been easier to stay comfortably stuck like everybody else? Would you be willing to go on that adventure? For those of you brave enough, or maybe just even curious enough, I tell you it's worth it. And I'm going to take you on that adventure today, but I have to take you back a few years. Back to a time when life was pretty good. I mean, I basically had it all. I was climbing this corporate ladder. I had achieved that big salary and the job title, stock options, company car, benefits, trips to luxury destinations. I had a great family and supportive friends. I mean, I basically had it all, right? Everything I was supposed to want. I mean, somewhere along the line, I lost happiness, satisfaction, and fulfillment. But I mean, other than that, I was so frustrated and restless, but to be honest, mostly I was numb on a good day. And so I decided to do what everybody does when they feel like that. I decided to go on vacation. To be completely fair, if you had heard my sister at that time, you would have heard her say, "Lisa, climbing Mount Everest is hardly a vacation." And although she probably was right, she had a point there, I wasn't crazy enough to summit. I was just going to go to the base camp. I needed a challenge, and I needed something to mean more. Since this was going to be a fundraising trip for the Arthritis Society, I figured maybe I could do both of those things and have a little bit of fun in the process. So I dedicated myself to training for months and months and asked everybody I knew to donate to the cause. And eventually I arrived in the town of Lukla, which, to be honest, was probably even a bigger adventure just getting there. And they throw my bag on the back of a yak, and they're like, "Hike that way." I mean, we literally start hiking from the tarmac. And you can imagine maybe I had a bit of nervous excitement, I guess, for this 2-week trek I was about to go on. And yet, I also believed I knew exactly what it was going to be like. That's a clue, by the way. If you ever know exactly what something is going to be like, it's kind of a heads up. Because I had no idea. I had no idea the twists and turns and the obstacles that I would face on that journey, and I had no idea that it would eventually change my life. And so I continued on this journey, and luckily for me, I wasn't alone. I met all sorts of people from all over the world. I met 3 particular characters. I nicknamed them Headache, Dizziness, and Nausea. And they were my constant companions, walking with me the entire way. So much so that the day that I was supposed to go to base camp, they convinced me I should stay in bed. And I was pissed, because I had not come that far to only go that far. And so the next morning I woke up, and I didn't care if they were coming with me or not. I was going to go to base camp. I was getting to my destination regardless. And so it was, other than the oxygen-carrying Sherpa that was 100 yards behind me waiting for me to drop, I walked into base camp that day completely alone. Exhausted, dehydrated, malnourished. I had to slump down on the ground and prop myself up on my backpack. And I looked up in the sky, and I could see the tip of Everest sort of looming down on me in this bright blue sky. And as the sun warmed my face, two thoughts came to my mind that day. The first was gratitude. I mean, I knew in that moment that I was sitting on this place on earth that very, very few people ever get to witness. And I was grateful. Second, so why didn't it feel better? I mean, what was wrong with me? Am I incapable of happiness, satisfaction, and fulfillment? I had just trained for months, and I had hiked for a week, and I had fought back the altitude posse, and I arrived at my destination. And I had trained for years, and I had worked for more than a decade in that corporation, and I had arrived. And in both places, I felt empty. Until one single thought in two simple words. Turning point. Turning point. Base camp is not a destination. I mean, if you're summiting, it's a starting place. For me, it was simply a turning point. I wasn't meant to stay there. And I wasn't stuck there. And that simple revelation allowed me to scrape my butt off the ground and start walking in a new direction. And since that day on base camp, I've thought about this idea of turning points and how much they are such a powerful catalyst for change, that they create this momentum. Because I'm not going to pretend that those first few days leaving base camp were easy, because they weren't. And yet each and every step forward gave me momentum to keep moving. And so I learned that turning points are a powerful catalyst for change, that they create momentum. You know, it's a lesson that I probably learned years and years ago from a young man who was raised in British Columbia and who, at the unfortunate young age of 19, lost his right leg to bone cancer. And although that could have been a defining moment for anyone's life, the true turning point was when Terry Fox decided to use his other leg to run across the country. And despite the fact that Terry ran basically a marathon a day for 143 days, he was forced to stop before he hit the Pacific Ocean and before he'd raised $1 for each of the 24 million Canadians alive that day. And yet, the momentum that came from that first step, when Terry dipped his artificial leg in the Atlantic Ocean and started walking in that direction, created such a legacy that I can't even imagine Terry ever dreamed of. But today, that legacy, that foundation, has raised over $650 million for cancer. Turning point. Terry decided he wanted to raise money and awareness so that other children would not have to suffer the harsh realities of cancer. That was his turning point moment. That day on base camp, I told you I was alone. And so there was no one to tell me it was time to go. And I've read somewhere that Terry Fox's mother was not really thrilled about the idea that her young son was going to run across the country, only 2 short years after losing his leg. But Terry didn't need her permission. Because turning points give us our own permission. They allow us to give ourselves permission to walk in a new direction. That day on base camp, I had to decide for myself it was time to go. It was a lesson that came in very handy a few months later when that corporation that I worked for went through a major downsizing. I was surrounded by friends and coworkers who were afraid of losing their jobs. when I realized I was more afraid of keeping mine. And when that truth bomb hit, it was really hard for me to deny the fact that I was waiting for permission. I was waiting for other people to decide if I got to keep a job I didn't even want. Turning point. Turning points give us our own permission to walk in a new direction. You know, I can think of another young man, also from the West Coast, California this time, who was the epitome of not asking for anybody's permission to walk in a new direction. I can't even imagine that this young guy, when he started a company in the garage of his parents' house, that he ever thought he could be fired from his own company less than 10 years later. But Steve Jobs didn't give his board of directors permission to fire him. I think, actually, he officially resigned. But I doubt very much that he asked their permission to walk in his next direction. Can you picture this? Steve Jobs goes up to his board of directors, fine, I'm leaving. Do you mind if I go into the entertainment industry? Is it okay if I go and buy an animation company and help create blockbuster movies? He didn't ask their permission. Turning points give you your own permission. Now, getting fired from Apple was not the turning point of Steve Jobs' life, because situations and circumstances don't make turning points. It's the actions we take as a result of them. I mean, Steve was estimated to be worth $130 million at the time. He could have sat on a beach in Bora Bora and drank margaritas the rest of his life. But he chose to walk in a new direction. Turning point? I don't know. Anyone here own an iPad, an iPod, an iPhone? It's believed that Steve's time at Pixar was responsible for the innovations that he eventually brought back to Apple and made them the company that they are today. Now, I don't know how Steve came up with the idea that his next direction or the right direction for him was entertainment after all those years. And I have to say that when I was on Basecamp, it was a little bit easier to know which direction I was to go in. There were signs, like actual signs. When I left that corporate career, it wasn't always so obvious. I didn't know which direction to choose, and to be honest, I was really at a point where my turning point was almost about to become a dead end. Because waiting for the right direction and waiting for the right path or the perfect path isn't a turning point. And so I started talking to people, as many people as who would allow me to interview them, people that had also left corporate careers and professions, and I was really curious, like, how did you find that direction? Where did you go? What was the right way to get to your dreams? And I quickly began to appreciate the winding paths and the different detours and turning points that people took to get where they were. I spoke to an architect who was a marketer and a book publisher before he became an inspirational speaker, and an auto factory worker who ended up owning a cookie franchise, becoming a magician and eventually an entertaining hypnotist who gets paid 5 figures an hour. I don't know if there is a right direction. Maybe it's just a right now direction. I'll give you one more example of another young man from Europe this time, born and raised in Austria, who I can't even imagine would have thought one day of becoming the governor of California. Can you imagine someone sitting young Arnold Schwarzenegger down and saying, okay, son, you want the perfect path? Because there's only one. And this is what you got to do to become governor of California. First, you've got to be a world-famous bodybuilder. Then you're going to take a turning point through Hollywood, and you're going to become an action movie star. And then probably wouldn't hurt if you married into the American political royal family and governor, right? I mean, it's the obvious path. I mean, why stop there? I don't think Arnold should stop there, because apparently if the perfect path to becoming the next candidate for president of the United States is to be a host of your own reality TV show, I'd say Arnie might be on the bill in 4 years. So let's not wait for our right paths. Let's wait for the right now path. Now, despite all this wisdom that I was picking up from people like Arnold Schwarzenegger and all of the individuals that I interviewed, I have to say I was still a little bit challenged in even picking my right now direction. As I went down the mountain, the signs got a little bit less obvious as to what they meant. But I started to appreciate different kinds of signs, clues, clues that allowed me to keep going and knowing that I was going in my right direction. Because eventually, the oxygen came back into my lungs. And I remembered what it felt like to breathe. And I could hear the birds singing in the trees again, and the landscape turned green again. And I remembered what it was like to be in an environment that allowed you to thrive. And the energy and the joy as I got closer and closer, knowing I was going exactly where I wanted to go, I swear to you, despite the fact that I was still dehydrated and probably 20 pounds underweight, I swear I could have sprinted off that mountain. And before I knew it, I had looked up and this is me sprinting off the mountain. Before I knew it, I look up and I had rounded this last corner. And I see this blue wooden archway. It says Lukla. I was back. And underneath that archway were my long-lost friends. Satisfaction, happiness, and fulfillment. So today, as I continue down this path towards this archway of my own best life, I've realized that I can follow the energy and the joy that propels me forward. And you can too. Because what I really learned on that mountain was you don't have to climb to 17,600 feet to recognize you are at your own version of base camp. You don't have to wait for your mom's permission or to get fired from your own company to choose a new direction. And you certainly don't have to lose a limb to cancer before you take the first few steps. The only question is, are you ready and willing to go on the adventure?